All right, what I'm going to do between now and 9:40 is explain and then demolish a theory of knowledge attributed to Plato. And this is usually referred to as Plato's theory of knowledge. It's widely accepted in philosophy. It's very famous. It's widely respected, and it's wrong. But the thing about it, that I really like, is that it leads into a discussion of what knowledge is. What knowledge is in real life, not in my imagination, but in real life. So we have sort of an explanation or understanding of the difference between conceptual stuff and real stuff, and how to use evidence, right? Or at least how to think about evidence. I may not actually talk about real evidence here, but I kind of get close to it. Or at least I'm trying to be real world here. Trying, he says. So, here's a theory of knowledge attributed to Plato. Knowledge is, according to this theory, knowledge has exactly three elements. According to this theory, knowledge is justified, true belief. It's not justified This theory says that knowledge is not justified belief. The idea that knowledge is justified belief is wrong according to this theory. Knowledge is not true belief. If a belief is true, that doesn't make it knowledge, according to this theory. If a belief is justified, it doesn't make it knowledge, according to this theory. And it's not justified truth, which is a weird thing to say, and it's like, if an idea is justified and true, that doesn't make it knowledge if nobody believes it. Actually, that's the easy one, right? That's the easy one to explain, justified truth. Okay. So this is the theory, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain the theory and give you the sort of standard arguments for the theory. But while I'm explaining and giving you the standard arguments for the theory, while I'm explaining the theory, I'm not going to say what I think is wrong with it. Right? That's the second half of this lecture. I will explain what I think is wrong with this theory. But I'm not going to do it right away. Right? And so this is supposed to model a sort of philosophical exercise, because like Socrates and Theaetetus, you give a theory, explain it as well as you can, and then say what you think is wrong with it. And this is the way philosophy works, because eventually we come to theories that stand up to criticism, that don't fail when they're criticized logically. So, first thing, so what about justified belief? Now I'm going to give you an example to support the idea that knowledge is not justified belief. So here's the explanation of why knowledge is supposed to be not justified belief. And that's a good explanation. I like this one. I came up with this myself. There's a trick to it, but have you guys ever heard of the Tacoma Narrows Bridge? It's a bridge in Washington State. I think at one time in my prep page for this lecture, I had some video, because there is some cool video. Actually, it was filmed, because this happened in the 1940s. And they built a very beautiful suspension bridge across the Tacoma Narrows, which I think is Tacoma, Washington, right? There's a city there. So, you know what a suspension bridge looks like. And this was a lovely bridge. Right. Something like that. You know what these things look like, okay? And now, suppose that just after they built the bridge, we have an old ragged guy, I would call him a tramp. So suppose that this did not happen. This bit did not happen. They're just about to have the ribbon cutting ceremony on the bridge, and this guy bursts forward. He's all ragged and wide-eyed, and his hair's going everywhere. And he rushes up and says, "You can't have this bridge. No, don't use this bridge, because you'll all be in danger. If you're on the bridge, you'll be in danger. The bridge is going to fall down. The bridge is going to fall down." And the engineers are there, and the engineers, oh, I need like a blue pen. The engineers so this is the belief. Both of them are belief, right? They're both giving a belief. Bridge will fall down, bridge will stand. The engineers say, rubbish. The bridge will stand for at least 50 years. It will stand for 100 years. Because, look at these drawings and diagrams. And this is true. This is what they could have said. Because they had the drawings, and you know how engineering works. Engineering for this kind of construction is figuring out the strength of materials, the strength of structures, based on the known properties of the materials. And you try to make a bridge as light as possible while still being strong enough to carry something several times its maximum expected load. So if you expect to have 100 tons on the bridge at any one time, you want the bridge to be safe for 300 tons. That'll be a safety factor of 3. Something like that. You want, and they say, look, this has a safety factor of 10. I don't know what the safety factor was, but it can carry 5 times its expected load or something like that. And they look at this, and this is all based on engineering knowledge, real science. based on real science, the known properties of concrete and steel and everything like that. And they asked the engineer, the tramp, why do you think it will fall down? And he says, there's no trolls. There are no trolls in Washington State. They don't like Washington State. They hate the rain and the greenery and stuff like that. Tropical rainforests repel trolls. There's no trolls. And bridges will only stay up as long as there are trolls here to keep the bridge from falling down. The trolls hold the bridge up, right? And if you don't have trolls here, the bridge is liable to fall down any minute. Right? So, you know, if you want to save the bridge, you know, put advertisements in other states, build some nice troll housing under the bridge, see if you can attract some trolls to come in and away. And at this point, you know, they cart him away in the rubber suit and the straight jacket. Okay, now, that's imaginary. Right, there was an imaginary scene at the ribbon cutting. What actually happened after the ribbon cutting is very interesting, because sometime later, a wind came up. And there's film of this that's been transferred to video. I think it's still available on YouTube under Tacoma Narrows Bridge. Right? The bridge comes up, and there's film because somebody noticed that the bridge, instead of just sort of swaying in the wind, was moving back and forth ever more widely and rapidly. Right? The bridge was going back and forth like this. So somebody brings out a movie camera and slaps it on the bridge, and you can see this thing. There's a car, by the way, in the middle of this video, because somebody was driving along and said, "Oh, crap," and they got out of their car and ran for it. And there's this film of the bridge going like this, ever more, and eventually it breaks and bits fall into the Tacoma Narrows. Right. So, bridge will stand. It's a belief that's justified, but not true. Here's a true belief. Bridge will fall down. True. So, according to this theory, knowledge cannot be justified belief. Because, according to this theory, it's possible to have a justified belief that isn't true. And it's possible to have a true belief that's not justified. Right? Are there actual bridge trolls? Not as far as I know, unfortunately. In fact, there are no fantastical creatures involved with bridge construction and maintenance, at least not as far as I know. Say again?
Unless you're Monty Python. Sorry.
Right. So here's the argument that justification and truth you can't have justified belief is not good enough. True belief is not good enough because it'd be true and completely unjustified, true by coincidence. And then there's, well, the justification of truth. And for the other one, justified truth, well, let's see. Oh, wow, that's actually a bit harder to think about, but let's see. This isn't going to work the way I was going to write it. You'll see what. Did we know that in 1066 that trees are mostly air and water? Question mark.
No.
No, we didn't notice this in 1026. This is something we've only just recently understood. But was it true in 1066?
Yeah.
Yeah. If you think about all the scientific laws, all of them have been true throughout our entire history. Now, were they justified? Well, okay, truth, doesn't make knowledge because, but think about this, Let's say if you burn wood in a campfire or at the beach, how much ash is left? What is the weight of ash left? It's something like less than 5%, maybe around, I think it's about 2%, but it's certainly less than 5% of the mass that was there before. Right? You take a log that weighs 10 pounds and burn it, you don't get a pound of ash.
Like 10 ounces.
You get a few ounces of ash, maybe an ounce at most of ash. I mean, I've done huge bonfires, and there's virtually nothing left at the end. The amount of actual physical ash, right, of unburned material, you can burn them down to almost nothing. What are trees exposed to while they're growing? Well, they're exposed to earth, right? They got the roots down in the dirt. They're exposed to air. They're surrounded by air. And they get water, because we know that they die without water. In 1066, they didn't know that trees could be suffocated. Right? Nobody knew that, but they knew they were exposed to air. So, if it's earth, right? If the tree gets its structure from the earth, gets its mass from the earth, why is that mass not there when the tree is burned? It's earth. It will fall. We don't get a rain of dust. You completely consume a tree. You only get a tiny bit of mass. So only a tiny little bit of the mass from a burned up tree is earth. It's a very, very small proportion. Right? So what else is left for the mass to come from?
Of the ash, of the mass of the ash.
Yeah, what else is the mass? Right, think of you burning 100 pounds of lumber, right, of firewood. You get a couple of ounces of ash out of that. What happened to that other 100 pounds? And when the tree was going, where did that other 100 pounds come from? It has to be from the air and water. Mm-hmm. Right. Now they're combined in different ways so that the tree is not, dry wood. It's not actual water anymore, but it's made from water.
It turns back
So-
into air and water.
Say again?
It'll turn back into air and water, it's only the mass.
Yeah, it turns back into air and water. You mostly release carbon dioxide and some water vapor. I think it's actually made by the fire. Right. So it's justified if someone had thought to look. It's actually a pretty easy experiment to make, is to grow a tree and then take it out of the pot you grow it in and weigh the remaining earth, with a known quantity of earth. Pretty easy experiment, but nobody did it, and certainly not in 1066. So it's justified. If someone had believed it, it would have been justified, or it could have been justified, but nobody did the experiment. Nobody did the observations So, so nobody believed it. So it was true, and there's a justification for it, but it wasn't believed, so it's not knowledge. And so, have you ever had in your head a justification of something? You know something, right? But you don't know what it means, or you don't realize what it means at the time you know it. And then suddenly you figure it out, and suddenly you know something else about the situation. Right? It's like you think about a whodunit. You have all the facts, and then suddenly you figure out who the murderer is without any additional information.
Mm-hmm.
So when you had this, the justification, well, let me see if I can. I'm nearly there.
Well, the justification would be the additional information?
No,
Okay.
that's the opposite of it, because there is no additional information. Or if someone made a case for you, made an argument to you, and you didn't realize it was right until later. So let's look at it this way. Suppose I make an argument that something is true, and I lay out all the argument, all the evidence, and all my steps of reasoning, and you're like, nah, that's not true, I don't buy that. Right? But you know the justification, you know the argument. It just hasn't, the penny hasn't dropped, it hasn't clicked. And then you go away, and 2 days later you're thinking about this again and go, oh wait, no, that means he's right. You see it a different way.
So now you believe.
Yeah, now you believe it. You had the justification, you didn't believe it, so you didn't know that it was true. You didn't know the conclusion. Right, suppose I did this paralysis story, the story about that. So I give you all this facts, and you go, no, that doesn't work. I've actually had this happen, I've explained this to people, and they said, no, that's not right. And I give the evidence again, no, it's not right. And suppose one of those people goes away, and 3 days later goes, oh yeah, now I see it. At that point, they know, because they have a true, according to this theory, they have a justified true belief. Right? And they had the justification before, but they didn't believe it. So the justification hasn't changed. It's not a case that they had justification, they didn't have justification, and then they did. Here, they had the justification. It's there. And it was true. But they didn't believe it. So if you can't believe it, it can't be knowledge. Right? If there's something you don't believe, that can't be knowledge. And if there's something you believe that isn't true, it can't be knowledge. Right? You can't know something that isn't true. Right? And according to this theory, you can have a true belief that isn't justified. And that definitely isn't knowledge, according to this theory. So, I just realized I kind of skipped a step. So I want you guys to remember this stuff, while I lay out. I'm going to lay out the theory in another way. First time, what I'm going to do is reintroduce philosophical Mr. Ed. I'm emphasizing that it's philosophical Mr. Ed because there is really something about Mr. Ed that is not the way we normally think about objects. And it's important to put this in because this is not the way we normally think about objects thing. To think about this object in a way that's different from the way we think is to eliminate a shortcut. There's a shortcut people take in their thinking about things that is useful, it's natural, it is the thing we should do. We should take this particular shortcut when we think about things. But it is still a shortcut there. There's still a little jump that people take that exists. It's there. It's a thing. We don't recognize that we're doing it. We don't recognize we're jumping over this thing. We don't recognize that we're making this leap, but we always do it. I'm not saying it's wrong to do it. We always do it. What I'm talking about is recognizing that it's there. And I'll explain what that thing is in a little bit. But what I'm going to do, you can partially understand it by noticing what I don't say about Mr. Ed. Mr. Ed has all the features we associate with all horses. He has his color is one of the colors horses come in. Right? And none. None of the features that horses don't have. There's all the features we associate with horses, so with all horses. So you say, well, you know what? All horses have withers, right? So Mr. Ed has withers. Some horses are paint, some horses are roan, some horses, horses have different colors, but all horses have some horse color. Right? Maybe Mr. Ed's Palomino, that's a horse color. He doesn't have the giraffe pattern, right? That's not a horse color. He's not purple. Horses don't come in purple. Right? He has some horse color, because all horses have some horse color. Is this making sense?
Mm-hmm.
He does not have features that horses don't have. Doesn't have cloven hooves. Horses don't. He doesn't have horns. He doesn't have wings. He doesn't have extra legs. Right. So all the things, doesn't have tentacles. Right. So Mr. Ed has all of those features, and none of the features that horses don't have. So right now you're able to pretty well visualize Mr. Ed. Right? You know what Mr. Ed is like. Right? You know what Mr. Ed looks like, smells like. If you touch Mr. Ed, you know what Mr. Ed feel like. Because to answer the question, what does Mr. Ed feel like? You say, well, what does a horse feel like? Yeah. Okay, Mr. Ed actually happens, perhaps by coincidence, to feel like that. Now, this is the thing that makes Mr. Ed the philosophical Mr. Ed, rather than the real Mr. Ed from the TV show, or the fictional Mr. Ed. Notice that I absolutely and always say do not say that Mr. Ed is a horse. So if I'm describing Mr. Ed to you, and you say, hey, wait a moment, is Mr. Ed a horse? I'm going to say, maybe. I don't know. I'm not saying he's a horse. Right? That would be something you might want to think about, but you could think Mr. Ed's an elephant, and I won't deny you. You say, well, is Mr. Ed an elephant? I'll say, maybe.
Not a subjective opinion?
I don't know what that means.
So,
And it is not. It's not. It's what I'm saying is what I'm saying. Right? By the way, this is a very important rule in philosophy and in life. What people are saying is what they're saying. It's not some other thing that they're not saying. So if you want to bring in the term subjective, I could talk for 15 minutes why it's not subjective, or you could just accept that I'm saying only what I'm saying. And whether it's subjective or not, think about this. Don't think about this other stuff. Because if you start thinking about other stuff, oh, he's talking about this thing, you are going to be leaving the classroom in your head. You might as well be asleep at that point. These are the things you have to know. I don't say Mr. Ed is a horse, and if you put Mr. Ed in a room with a horse, Mr. Ed would look pretty much like the horse. And you could find a horse. Right? You take a description of Mr. Ed that says what color he is, you might be able to find a horse that's the same age and color that Mr. Ed is. Put them in the, can't tell them apart, which is unfortunate because one of them is Mr. Ed and the other one's a horse. Right. Just about everybody who saw Mr. Ed would say, hey, well, that's a horse. And I'm not saying that. Right. I would say, well, maybe. Right. Can you prove it? I might ask, well, can you prove it? And then they'll look at me funny. All right, so Mr. Ed has all the feelings we associate with horses and none of the features horses don't have. And I'm going to use Mr. Ed, and Mr. Ed kind of looks like this. I want you to pretend that that looks like a horse. Oh, I'm sorry, I mean, got 4 legs, right? He's sad because I drew him badly. Right. And then we have a guy. Oh, well. Actually, we'll have a, oh, wow. Do I have a green pen? I just realized, yes, I have a green pen. I have a yellow pen. I have an orange pen. Orange will have to substitute for green in this instance. So here's the farmer. Pretend that's a yellow patch that says John Deere. There's a green cap.
Why is he way bigger than the horse?
He's closer. He is closer. And he's harder to draw.
That's right.
Right, so there's a farmer, I guess in a blue shirt, like denim, I guess. Sleeves.
Overall.
Yeah, like bib overalls, I guess. So, rolled up Levi's. He's got hands. I guess the sleeves are too long. Boots. Huge, huge boots. He's wearing cartoon clown boots. I don't know why. That's just the way the drawing came out.
He's a blue collar.
Say again?
He's a blue collar.
Blue collar worker.
Yeah. I guess farmers are blue collar. Alright. So ears. Oh, it's got eyes. It's got to have eyes. See, Mr. Red.
That's actually a pretty good drawing.
Yeah.
Oh, no, yeah. Well, thank you. Usually it's even worse. Oh, I forgot the last thing.
Any farmer would have a mustache.
Any farm? I've known farmers. They don't all have
Oh.
mustaches. Okay, so the farmer is looking at Mr. Ed off there in the distance. Right. And thinks. so here's a thinks bubble. Curse you, pen. Thinks, right. Knows the name of that object. And the farmer notices all the features Mr. Ed has and doesn't have. Notices the hairy coat, the I don't know, palomino color, the long face, the moderately short ears, smooth coat, long tail made of long hairs, closed hooves, whatever you know. If it's a horse feature, Mr. Ed has it. Notices there's no wings, no udder, no wool, like not a sheep or a hippogriff or like that. Right? So he knows all that stuff. So Mr. Ed, Mr. Philosophical Ed, is a, what does the farmer believe about Mr. Ed? He's a horse. Horse. So he has a justified belief that Mr. Ed is a horse. Now we're going to touch on something that somebody else said. So there were a lot of you have made comments along here, and there was one comment I kind of ignored at the time, or said no, that's not it. But that comment will come up soon. And you can remind me, if you made that comment, you can remind me. Oh, wait a minute. Right, that's the back of a bald head. Robe, well, strictly speaking, I think it would be a calmus, but like a guy in a big t-shirt with feet. Well, he's got a big t-shirt. And this is Plato. Because we're attributing this theory to Plato. After reading the Theaetetus, I have no idea if this is what Plato thought. And at this point I don't care, because I just want to think about the implications of this particular theory. Oh, actually, Right, now when I draw this, I want you to understand that the thinks balloon is actually above Plato's head. It's not between him and the horse or the farmer, because he's got to see them, right? He actually sees them. And I'm going to draw the thinks balloon here, and you might think it gets in the way of him seeing Mr. Ed and the farmer, but actually it doesn't. It's, it's above. So we can see it. Oh, I did it wrong. Farmer believes Mr. Ed is a horse, right? So I'm going to call that one, belief. He, the farmer, I'll just call him farmer. Farmer has justification. what is this justification for the belief? The justification for the belief is Mr. Ed has hooves, tail, doesn't have horns, and wings or anything like that. Anything you can say that horses have, Mr. Ed, that all horses would have, Mr. Ed has it. Anything you say that no horses would have, Mr. Ed doesn't have it. Right. So here's justification. I'm going to call that 2. We know what the justification is. And, adds Plato, it's true that Mr. Ed is a horse. So, thanks Plato, the farmer has, well, true is number 3. A justified, that's point 2. True, that's point 3. Belief, that's point 1. And so he knows Mr. Ed is a horse. So, this is Plato. Plato believes that the farmer knows that Mr. Ed is a horse. Plato believes he is looking at knowledge, right, assuming that Plato has some way of knowing what's going on in the farmer's head. Let's say the farmer talks to him. He's got like a little microphone or something, and Plato's over here with the walkie-talkie. Plato knows the farmer's thinking. Plato would say, Mr. Ed is a horse. And for a long time, I thought this was a reasonable explanation of knowledge. That, yeah, knowledge is justified true belief. Mr. Ed has all the features we associate with horses, and I believe Mr. Ed has all these features. Right? I see the features, and I believe that, and Mr. Ed is a horse. So therefore, knowledge is justified true belief. What's wrong with this picture? Right? I'm going to try and break this. I've built it up, I've set it up, it looks perfectly solid, like the Tacoma Narrows bridge at first. But I'm going to try and break this. I'm going to swivel my camera, or I'm going to move my camera. I successfully resisted to make a funny face into the camera. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just draw 3 buckets or tubs. Right? I'm going to these buckets. Right? And we're going to look at the farmer's state of mind, the picture here. We're going to look at the picture here to see if we could justify the claim that the farmer knows that it's the horse. To see if this claim makes sense. So, we're going to start with belief, because that's actually the simplest part. We're going to look at justification. Because that's fairly easy too. And then we're going to look at the truth bucket. So we might think of ourselves as asking Plato, all right, you say knowledge has 3 criteria. It has to be a belief that is justified and true. So you can put something in this bucket that's recognizably belief. You can put something in this that's recognizably justification. And you can put something in this bucket that is recognizably truth, but different from justification. Right? It didn't say, the theory doesn't say that knowledge is two things. It says that knowledge is three things. Right? 1, 2, 3. Right? Not two, three. So if there's nothing that goes in the bucket, in one of these buckets, if we can't put something in each different one of these buckets, we don't have justified true belief, and we don't have truth. And if it turns out to be impossible to put things in all three buckets, we never have knowledge. And is it true in your experience that we never have knowledge? Why would we use the word? Why would we have a word knowledge if it was something we never had? All right. And so if it turns out that knowledge is not, justified true belief is something that we never had, would we want to say, and actually I want to put it like this, I should write this down, because this is awesome. I just thought of this way of doing it, is it? If it turns out that we never have justified true belief. Justified true belief is something that is impossible for humans to have, and we really only want to worry about what humans can have. Would we say, oh no, we never, ever know anything. Or B, would we say, knowledge is not justified true belief? Would we say, well, there's this thing we call knowledge that we wish we could have, but we never have it, so we might as well not talk about it? Or would we want to say, there's this thing we call knowledge that we do have sometimes, and it's not this justified true belief business, that this is the wrong definition of knowledge? And I want to argue that the job of philosophy is to take a word that people use all the time and believe that they have, and is actually a very useful thing, because the distinction between knowledge and stuff we don't know, and knowledge and stuff that's not true, is an important one. Right? How did we construct technological civilization? Did we do it from complete ignorance and never knowing anything? Or do we know stuff? We know this. Knowledge is an important concept. It's a part of our lives. Most people don't need to understand knowledge. Really, to go on with your life, you don't really need to understand knowledge. You only need to understand knowledge to pass my exams. And after that, you can just forget all about it. Right? But what philosophy is about understanding things. And one of the reasons to study philosophy is to learn how to understand things, to learn how to think deeply about stuff, what it's really like to think deeply about things. Right? And if you're interested in knowledge, well then you can study knowledge and remember this and go on with the study of knowledge. And if you're not interested in knowledge, you can forget this lecture, except how great I was. But you can forget about the content of this lecture and just go on with your life. Right? But what I would want you to take away from this lecture is that concepts can be effectively studied, that claims can be effectively studied, and we look at the implications of the claim to see if those implications make sense. And if they don't, we can discard the claim. And so it's the whole thing of theory versus evidence. If someone has a theory and then the evidence, what happens next, the experiences, we have experiences that are inconsistent with the theory, do we say those experiences don't count, ignore them, because we have our theory that we keep, or do we say, well, that turned out to be wrong? And always, it should be, that turned out to be wrong. We have a theory about this thing, it doesn't match our experiences, it doesn't match what we happens under certain conditions, it makes predictions that turn out to be false when we test them. Junk the theory, move on. And that's the way science works. And it's the way all real knowledge generation works, is we have ideas about things, we test them, if they don't work, we junk them, if they're not supported by the evidence, we junk them, and we try to come up with something else, and then we test that. All right. So, here's the bit where you watch closely. Right? In order for Plato, for this theory attributed to Plato to be correct, it has to be the case that for every claim of knowledge, every true claim of knowledge, every time we actually know something, and with utmost confidence. I mean, anyone here really doubt that Mr. Ed is a horse?
No.
Right? No, we have this emotion, we have this feeling, strong feeling that Mr. Ed is a horse, and we want to respect that, right? And we want to think that we know that Mr. Ed is a horse, even though I have not specified that he's a horse. See the thing about jumping? I didn't specify that he's a horse, but the impulse, even with me, the impulse is to, hey, it's a horse. Why would you say anything else? Well, I haven't said anything else, but I haven't said he's a horse. Right, so, here's the farmer who Plato thinks knows that Mr. Ed is a horse. And what do we put in the belief bucket? Well, it's simple. He has an opinion. Mr. Ed is a horse. Right? Now, once this goes in the belief bucket, it's stuck there, because that's the belief. So it can't go in there. I believe it, and that's not just, belief is not justification, and belief is not truth, and justification is not truth. Truth is, otherwise the theory is not not this theory, right? Theory is justified true belief. It's not justified belief, it's not true belief, it's justified true belief. Justification and truth are different, or the theory is just, what is knowledge? Well, it's justified belief, or it's true belief. That would be redundant, right? So if justification turns out to mean the same thing as truth, the theory is wrong. All right, what goes into justification? What could you offer me to justify a belief that Mr. Ed is a horse?
He looks like a horse.
Well, break it down into details.
The hooves, the tail, the mouth, the nose, the ears.
Closed hooves. Ow, ow. Closed hooves. Hairy mane. Tail. No wheels. No smokestack. No wings. No smokestack. Etc. 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 So anything you could say about Mr. Ed that would tend to justify a belief that Mr. Ed is a horse goes into this bucket. right, and hundreds of things go into it. Even if we just count the features that Mr. Ed has, right, that are like horses, all of that goes in there, right? You can think of this piling up with little bits of justification, all adding together to add up to a complete justification. All right? What goes in this bucket? There is nothing that goes in this bucket. There never has been. Now, I had a student who was in my class and then went into someone else's philosophy class, and that professor talked about knowledge. And he talked about knowledge being justified true belief. And apparently he told my student that knowledge is justified true belief. And the student explained my thing and asked what is truth? What goes in the truth bucket? What goes in the truth, and what have you put in there to make this truth bucket? And the guy said, correspondence with reality.
Huh?
Yeah, well,
Right. It's our belief that a horse corresponds with reality. In reality, he is a horse. Okay? Okay, so what you're saying, and I say, I put what is in there? Well, Mr. Ed is a horse. Okay, yeah, I know what you mean when you say it's true that Mr. Ed is a horse, but what do you put in the bucket? Well, it corresponds with reality. The statement, Mr. Ed is a horse, corresponds with the reality. Okay, isn't that just another way of saying it's true that Mr. Ed is a horse? Truth, right? Sure, correspondence with reality. When we assume that something is true, we're assuming that the statement corresponds with reality. Now, put something in the correspondence with the reality bucket. What do we have that tells us that the phrase, Mr. Ed is a horse, corresponds with the reality of the object that we're discussing about? What do we put in the bucket? Because correspondence with reality is just a sort of explanation of what the word truth means. When I say, suppose you've never heard the word truth before. Never heard the word truth. It's a common word, but let's say you lived in a weird environment where nobody used the word truth. And you say, this fellow just told me, I come in from outside, and you say to me, my friend just told me that it's really cold out there. And I said, well, that's true. And you said, what does true mean? I go, what? What does true mean? And I go, well, true means it corresponds with reality. This statement is an actual description of what's actually going on out there. And since it actually is cold out there, the statement is true. Well, the statement corresponds with reality. But saying it's actually cold out there is another way of saying it's true that it's cold out there. Right? What do I offer you to show that it's true? I can show that I believe it, right? And I can show I have evidence. I can give you evidence, right? And I bring in icicles and snow, and I don't know, I take some beer out there that you've previously marked, and I set it out there, and bring it back in, and it feels cold. Or you just go out there and oh, it feels cold, right? But all of those things go in the justification bucket. None of them go in the truth bucket. And in point of fact, knowledge cannot possibly be justified true belief. That is not, it can't be justified true belief because we can never really say whether something is true or not. We assume, we leap. What we do is we make a leap. Think about this way. Suppose I come in and I make a statement and I say something like, Obama knew what he was doing when he said he was going to bomb Syria. Which is, you know, it's kind of, it's possible that he knew what he was doing. It's also possible that he was a complete madman or an idiot or any kind of things. And you say, can you prove that? What are you really asking? If you ask me, can I prove that this is true? Can I prove that something is true? What are you asking me for? Are you asking me for anything other than justification? If I give you justification, let's say I have tapes of White House discussions, I have testimony from people who were in the White House, who are unimpeachable sources, who are people that are known to be trustworthy. It's hard to come up with that when you're dealing with politicians, but let's say, you know, like the Pope was in there. Yeah, say again? Or Neil deGrasse Tyson, or you know, someone you can really trust. And it's like that. And or emails he sent to people, State Department cables. I come up with this stuff, and I give you this. If I just keep giving you justifications, do you say, that's not good enough, I need truth? Or do you at some point say, all right, I believe it, I think that's true too? Right. So justification and truth, or justification, truth and belief are not different things. Right. Now, who was it said, it's not knowledge until someone agrees with you? Or did they go home at the break? Oh, okay, yeah.
Social conformity.
You were, not social conformity. Social conformity is very different.
Okay.
Someone else believing you. You were on the right track, because look at this diagram I drew. In my description of the farmer, I didn't say anything about truth. In my description of Plato, I had a description of truth. I said truth. All right, I'm going to move the camera over. All right. So truth. I had it. But it's Plato thinking it's true. So what I want to do is go out of this sort of metaphysical, ontological thing that has an idea that truth is something that exists independently of language and independently of thought, that there's a truth thing here that's hard and fast and certain, because there ain't. Right? Here is, sorry to erase the farmer. Right. So, I'll leave the buckets up for now. Right. So, I'll leave the bucket. Knowledge is not justified, true. Knowledge is not justified true belief. So what is going on when we say something is true, when we say we know something, when the... well,
accepted.
say again?
It's just accepted as the truth.
Yeah, but you just go away from that social conformity thing, because it's a death trap. Really. Knowledge, truth is not social conformity. It's not social agreement. That's called the ad populum fallacy. It's perfectly possible for billions upon billions of people to agree about that something is true
That's true.
when it's not justified and all the evidence says it's false.
Yeah, yeah, you're
Right,
right.
right. Social conformity is the death of logic. Someone write that down, because I think that's good. I want credit for that one. Right. Knowledge is not justified through belief. It's not social conformity. First thing we have to give up is the idea that we can have certain knowledge of the world, that we can be absolute certain. I mean, I'm pretty sure that the next object I see that looks like a horse is a horse, but you can't know anything for absolute sure. The Tacoma Narrows Bridge, well, we thought we knew. What we say is, we thought we knew, we were really, really confident, right? Really confident, but we turned out to be wrong. And a lot of knowledge claims turn out to be wrong, even ones that we have ample justification for. So I want to change the game. I want to change what we're doing and say that the proper way to analyze knowledge, truth, and belief is to first look at them in the context of a language game. If I say, I know X, I just mean I believe X. If I say X, you know what X means? It's any statement. The bridge will fall down, the bridge will stand, Mr. Ed is a horse, right? Any statement. If I say X is true, what do I mean? I just mean I believe X. Okay. When people say, when Plato looks at the farmer and says, it's true that Mr. Ed is a horse, what is he really saying? I also believe it. That's why I remembered your comment when someone else agrees with you. Right? That two people agreeing about something doesn't really make something knowledge, but they will say that they have knowledge. Oh, you know it. Right? And I have heard people make incredibly absurd knowledge claims, but they agree with each other and they say, yeah, that's true, I believe it, it's right. By the way, nobody really wants to say, I believe it. I believe it is usually a weaker statement. I try to say, I believe, when I talk about things I believe, and so should everyone. Is there anything that you can say that is where you'd be justified in saying something more than I believe? Not I just believe it, but it's true that. When people say it's true that, what they mean is they believe it with more confidence than things where they just say I believe. So there's this range of things, you know, I kind of think that, to, you know, I think that. Oh, I definitely think that. You know, I really believe that. I absolutely believe this. This is absolutely true. This cannot be wrong, and I will kill you if you say otherwise. Right? There's these levels of confidence, levels of vehemence in things. But it's always belief. Right? Now, when are we justified to say belief, or when can we, from a rational perspective, being rational about it, rationally, what should we, this is sort of a rational imperative. If we're going to be rational, the idea of thinking correctly. If we're going to think correctly, what should we call knowledge? What should we call knowledge? Well, what's the difference between a belief that every rational person would call knowledge and a belief that rational people would tend not to call knowledge? Well, just as there are degrees of confidence in belief, which are sort of emotional things, there's also degrees of justification. Right? Suppose we encounter Mr. Ed at a distance through a fog, and it's kind of foggy, and you can see there's 4 legs, and there's some kind of tail, and it's some kind of head, and that's about all you can see. And I say, that's a horse. Is my belief justified? Not really. I don't have enough information. But I get closer to the animal and closer, I can get more and more justification. We'll look at the colors and things like that. There's no wings, this kind of thing. Get real up close to the thing, and it smells like it has the horse smell, has the horse coat and stuff like that. You look at it and then you suddenly say, well, I've got lots and lots of justification here. So, an alternative a definition of knowledge is to say, is well justified. Right? We don't need anything in the truth bucket, but we need a lot in the justification bucket. And we can argue about how much is enough. But in practical terms, if you go out and look about how people actually use the word knowledge, and the word knowledge works in our society to provide us with things like video cameras and erasable whiteboard markers and nice hats and eyeglasses that enable me to read, and backpacks and electricity and fluorescent lights and digital watches and cell phones, right? There's a definition of knowledge that is used in human society to make the difference between beliefs we act on and beliefs we don't act on. Right? People started making cell phones when they came to have a justified belief that you could make a device with a system that would use relatively low-powered radio transmitters, certain kinds of coding, certain kinds of stuff. Once they had this justified belief, just about every technology is based on a justified belief. Every technology, not just about, absolutely every technology is based on justified beliefs. Nobody started, when people start on wild, unjustified beliefs, it virtually never works. Right? So we have this standard of justification for belief, and to be a rational person, to have a good life, you apply a standard of rational belief. You apply a standard of justification. Some beliefs, you act on beliefs you think are justified, and if you're rational, these will be where actual, real justification is good, and you don't act on beliefs that aren't justified. So that's my definition of knowledge, and I think that's a definition of knowledge a lot of people share. And it's different from the idea of justified true belief because it says we don't need a truth bucket. And when I use the word true, let's say something's true, I just mean I believe it. If I say something is justified, I have all this information to give you. And if I say a belief is justified and I can't give you a justification, I'm just lying. Thank you very much for your attention. You've been a wonderful audience. Tip your waiters.